Uh, what would you say, and I bet you've been asked this before, I bet you've thought of this before. What would you say has been the most difficult challenge in your career as an artist and entertainer?
Oh man, I mean, challenges come with the business. I feel like, but and those are the things that I think they're just so monumental because I think I always feel like I have more challenges in life than I do successes. But I think for me, it's balancing the empathy and the care that I have for people other than myself along and balancing that against, but I need to be this image of a director that I always have in the back of my head, that James Cameron, kind of a forceful tyrant of a director. This is how it's going to be. And we're going to take that hill, and everybody, or that kind of Patton, right? We're going to take that hill. We're going to do it together. Come with me or fall behind. But, come with me and we're going to take this hill. And I tend to always kind of lean a little bit more to, oh, I see you're kind of slowing down. Okay, we'll slow down a little bit, let you rest. And instead of being that hard taskmaster, and really regimented. So I do balance between that. And I think that's my biggest challenge, is probably that balance and knowing how to manage that.
It seems like you could just fully embrace the empathy role if you didn't have to deal with a budget or a schedule, right?
Oh yeah, I could be everybody's best friend. Yeah, if I was and that's really what a supervising animator, kind of the step down, has a lot easier role, because they don't have to deal with their crews, deadlines and schedule. They have their own schedules of the work they're doing personally. But then they're really just kind of being a helpmate to everybody. Let me help you by drawing over Pumbaa and showing you how, his nose needs to be bigger. And they're like, oh, thanks, that's helpful. And then and then they leave your office and they got to deal with production people breathing down their neck. But when I'm the director, I not only have to work with people on that kind of capacity of helping them understand what I want for the scenes and that kind of thing creatively, and I do have empathy for them. But then I also have to turn around and say, but we need this. And if you can't do it, I have to give it to somebody else. So you got to tell me right now, can you do this? And I need to put a weight on them that I wouldn't want on my shoulders, but I have to be that person to put that weight on their shoulders so that they feel that there's a box that they're working in that they got to work towards.
They say that the flip side of empathy, I don't know if flip side is the right metaphor, but the empathy taken to an extreme becomes codependency, right? Where we take on personal responsibility for everyone else's feelings, everyone else's experiences, everyone else's successes and failures. As someone who's naturally empathetic and uses that as a strength in leadership, how do you make sure you don't tip over and become codependent, where all of a sudden everybody else's struggles are keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I'm not as deeply empathetic as that. I am one that can. My wife always describes me as, I'm kind of a duck, and I let stress kind of fall off me like a duck with water. It just flows off my back, so that when my head hits the pillow at night, I can sleep. And that's mostly been true for me. I am able to kind of release myself of, okay, that's their issue, that's their problem, and I got to move forward with my own issues and problems. And those are things that I can control, or maybe can't control, but those are the things that most likely I have to take ownership of, and they have to take ownership of that. So, excuse me.
Bless you. So the duck metaphor is awesome, because what you're describing there is like a deep acceptance of a situation as it is, and not getting caught in the cycle in your head of replaying conversations or pre-playing conflict you have to have the next day with someone who's not pulling their load or whatever it happens to be. And you talk about being good at owning what's yours and really not owning or even attempting to own what's somebody else's. That's an incredible strength, and it's a great coping skill, both in the moment and a resilience building skill. But for a lot of us, that's hard to come by. It's difficult. What would you personally say are some of your own go-to strategies for when you're really getting worked up I know you don't like sports, so you're not going to the gym to throw hoops or anything, but when you're really getting worked up, what's your outlet? What's your coping? And then how do you build such good resilience that I'm hearing in you?
I think it's just something that's developed with time for me. And when it was, when I was at my most stressed, of course, was on Mulan. Young director, first time director at Disney. It all kind of goes back there for me. And when I had those moments of the weight of the world was on me, and I guess that's when I really looked towards my wife as being a huge element. Several things. My wife spoke into my life and always kind of was great at going, yeah, but you have to take out the trash. You have to tuck out, by putting, which actually kind of seemed like more burdens on my shoulders. But when I walked in the door after a stressful day at work, she was really good at just kind of putting me in my place, like, yeah, but this is what matters right now. We're going to have dinner. You're going to take out the trash. We're going to tuck in the girls. We're going to sing them a lullaby tonight, and or you're going to read a story for them. And all of a sudden, I was able to go, okay, these things are temporary. And there are also things that I need to be able to turn off, and I need to be able to switch gears. And oftentimes, I will say that I would come home, and it would take me a long time to go through that process of relieving myself of the stress and the issues of the day, and really changing my mind and gearing towards, now I'm a father, now I'm a husband, and those things matter. And I want to be good at that job. I want to be in God's word, and I want that to soothe me and be that salve that I need. And so reading God's word, and sometimes it was singing to myself or even out loud hymns from the Bible, or hymns from church, and just being caught up in that and going and just remembering what it was to be a new Christian and a believer and loving Jesus, and just going, okay, ultimately what I am is a father, a husband, and a servant of God. And not necessarily in that order, but ultimately those were the things that were the most important to me. And I just had to always put that on and remember that as much as possible. And it got me through so many other things that in the moment seems like it's dire and this is life and death. But ultimately, it was a bigger picture view that I think God was able to help me through with the help of my wife and the Word.
Wow, that's great advice. In your book, I love the way it's structured too, because it seems like the first half roughly is kind of laying out what it looks like to be a director, including a lot of the stressors. You talk about banging your head against the wall a lot, and the things you'd wished you'd been taught back at Cal Arts or somewhere along the way. And then the second half is really, I don't know if you did this intentionally, but it's a lot of great leadership principles of how to be a good director, right? How to take care of your crew. And sometimes it's little one-liners, and other times it's a whole chapter to really absorb, a philosophy of how to be a solid, transformational, inspiring leader, rather than that transactional leader who just sort of signs your paycheck at the end of the day and makes sure you do your work, right? The very last piece that you saved for the end, though, is live long and prosper, right? And you said, don't work too hard. This is your last bit of advice, and all the advice you've given. Your career, this life is short. Enjoy the projects and people you work with. Take time off to be with your family. Don't miss out on your kids' plays and sporting events. That's the important stuff. At the end of the day, isn't contentment in life the truest form of success? I gotta say, and I'm sorry for the cliche here, but is this Hakuna Matata? Is that what this is here? And is that really what it comes down to? Really finding a way to take the serious things seriously and let other things be as minor as they actually are?
Because I think, it goes back to this philosophy that I have of, I think we all take things too seriously in life. And I've always loved humor because of that. I've always loved, in God's word, I love the humorous moments in it too, because I even see, even from a universal level, that God had a sense of humor, and then he saw things as pure joy. And I think there's so many times that we don't think about just being grateful, just being happy, just having and displaying joy in our lives. And that can come from the most simple thing, in your day. That can come from, just discovering, I don't know, a butterfly outside of your window and stopping for a moment and contemplating that beauty of that creation. And we just, particularly in Hollywood, we get too caught up in ourselves, and there's a lot of ego, and there's a lot about, this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for me, and I'm going to make sure that this happens and that I get the credit for it, and I need to be paid more because of this and that, and in comparison to this person, I'm doing a much better job. And I don't know, there was a time at Disney when I went through a lot of that, and I had to pull myself away from that and go, this isn't what it's about. It's not about the positions and the money and the credit and the fame and anything like that. It really needs to be about something more than that. And it needs to be about, what are the basics that make me happy, and where do I find joy? And that's usually in family and God, the Word, just little things, even a happy song, whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Um, in your book, you talk a lot about, like we just said, both skills and attitudes that make for a successful directing career. Everything from not micromanaging, right? That's got to be a huge one for keeping the stress off you. Trust in your crew, serving your team. Especially, I really like the section on gut instinct, because in today's culture, we talk a lot about evidence-based leadership. And as someone who works in biomedical sciences, I see the importance of that, making decisions based on evidence, not based on gut instinct. But in the world of art and leadership and human relations and empathy, where does gut instinct fit in?
Well, I think we're all, born with an innate feeling of truth, right? And I think that's where, and many people will say, well, that's opinion. Truth and opinion are you can't disconnect them, because one person's truth is another person's truth is another person's truth. And I do get that, and I understand that, but I do think that there's certain universal truths that we have. And when I think about specifically animation and creating a story, there are certain truths that we know and that we connect with universally. So whether I be a Chinese older man in China, or an Indian person over here, or a female that in Africa, or wherever culturally I was raised or anything, there are certain truths in story dynamics and entertainment that, that if you look at it, you can go, okay, this should be funny, and this should be funny for most people. This should be a dramatic element. And so to me, it's looking at, that's what I talk about when I talk about, as a director, following your gut instincts, is that I feel like we're all born with a certain innate truth about what is entertaining, what is emotional, what makes people happy, what makes people laugh, empathy and how important that is. And those things aren't usually things that we learn on a higher level in college. Those are things that we see at an early age, when we're infants, and we develop those understandings at a very early age. And those are the kind of the common sense that I think is the most important thing that makes a good director. Not book knowledge and things like that, or even a ton of life experiences. I think it's those common sense gut instincts that really, and the willingness to go for that truth that and you feel is important in a story is one of the most important things a director can have.
That's really powerful. Can you give us an example from any one of your films, if you Mulan, any of them, whichever one that comes to mind, where maybe all the other voices were saying one thing, but gut instinct was telling you something else, and it led you right?
There's many, actually, but one that pops into my mind is, I've always been a student of comedy, and I love humor, and I do feel like most people do, whether they're a very stuffy kind of serious person or not. I think deep down we all have a funny bone that needs to be itched every once in a while. And so finding the truth and humor or making something funny is something that I feel like I've studied over the years to have a better understanding of it. And they say the thing about comedy, which is true, is like, once you dissect it, it's not funny anymore. So it is one of the hardest things to study. But I think there was a sequence in Mulan, specifically where she goes off into, she's already taken the conscription notice, if you've seen the movie, and she's met Mushu, and she's thinking, I got to join this army to save my father's life, but how am I going to be a man? And so she walks into the army outpost for the first time dressed as a man, but that's not enough. She discovers how men act when they're all by themselves and they're with their buddies, and a lot of stereotypical things like farting and just gross kind of humor too, spitting and puking and things like that, and pushing each other and getting into fights. And she's like, and from her point of view, she's a woman dressed as a man, so we as the audience are there with her. We have an empathy for her being a female, seeing this world, kind of like the curtain is drawn back for the first time for her into the world of man. And you could play that scene seriously, and it could be intimidating and kind of scary and frightening, or you could play it in a comical way. And my thing was always, this has got to be really funny. This should be in contrast to everything we saw before that, because right before that we had a very impactful emotional sequence where she takes the conscription notice and rides off, and her father wakes up and her mother, and they're concerned for her life. She's going to surely die. And now she's going into almost 5 minutes later, she's going into a sequence that is completely funny and raucous kind of humor and kind of gross and all that kind of boy kind of stuff. And to me, we needed to go full bore into that. Now, not everybody, including my co-director, believed in that direction. And that was something that I had to follow my own instincts for, because I knew that was going to be valuable. And I think that the audience needed that balance of something serious that we came out of, and now let's give them a sense of relief and fun as she goes into the army. Yeah. And that tone change was really impactful in the movie.
How, can I ask, how had it been written in the script, and how had it been storyboarded leading up to that point?
Well, I think that's where, my influence came very early on that as a director, because it was in the script pages that we had those discussions, and it was early on. So by the time, it was pretty humorous, and we just kept, my thing was, let's keep plussing it. Let's keep adding to this. So it did get humorous in the script. And then when we went to the storyboard, we pushed it even more. And then when we got to animation, we pushed it even more. Like, how long and I remember being at meetings where we discussed it, but Mulan spits at some point trying to be all macho. And then she's got like a dangler. And we're like, well, how long should it just dangle there, the spit from her mouth? And, what's the funniest amount before it breaks, or it's not realistic. So, each level, all the way down to animation and even color, you're making choices for how much to push that, and where do you kind of pull back, and what are the boundaries there of the humor, and how do we push it even farther. So it starts very early on when we're talking about tone and setting that up, but it's how you carry it through, and how far do you keep pushing it.